Hey team, welcome back to Trauma Agility. Today we have Sherrie Barch on the podcast, and she is the author of Ring to Remember and Heaven's Bell. And I am so excited to have you on because we're going to talk about grief, which is something that a lot of us don't know how to do. So welcome to the show.
Thank you, Haley. I'm so excited to be here today.
Yeah. So what is Heaven's Bell?
Heaven's Bell is a fictional story about what happens when two 11-year-olds that are best friends experience death. One of the 11-year-olds die early in the story and goes to heaven or outer space, as the story depicts, and the other friend lives a long life. And the story takes place in parallel universes, so we get to follow Cody in heaven and we get to follow Ashley on earth, and just some of their experiences, and then in the end how they reunite. So it's just a story. It's less a story about death and more a story about friendship and love and honoring those that may not be with us here on earth.
I love that so much. I love it so much. I love the paradigm, like dynamic of having two separate worlds going on at the same time, because you get to conceptualize what it would be like for both. And of course we don't know, but it just increases our imagination on it,
Yes.
right? It allows for creativity and a creative flow of like, well, what is possible? And at least to have the conversation, right? About
Yes. Yes, and it's completely fictional. I mean, it's Heaven's Bell, but it's not a religious book. It's really geared toward 8 to 12-year-olds, but I've got a lot of people saying to me it's not a children's book.
Mm.
It's a book for families. It's even younger than 8. You can tell the story of Heaven's Bell in a way that may not be depicted in the story. And my theory is everybody has Heaven's Bell stories. This is just one. But
Yes.
you have a Heaven's Bell story with anyone that you've ever created a memory with, whether they're in heaven yet or not. You're building those relationships and therefore those bells that someday will be hung in heaven.
Yeah.
So
And
when I
it's
was a little girl, the story, the way my creative imagination, and I think my superpower is storytelling, but what I thought about, because I really wasn't exposed to a lot of funerals back in my day or with my family. I think I was shielded a little from, funerals and sad things, which isn't uncommon, I'm learning. But
right.
what I thought about was that when I lost my uncle or my uncle died and went to heaven, that there would be a bell in heaven that was hung for him. And it was a really happy day. And everybody was there to greet him, along with, my grandparents and my neighbor that died. And everybody was happy and hugging. And when I thought of him, the bell would have a special sound that was mine. And he
Mm.
would know that I was here on earth thinking about him.
So
So
that's
that's
where
really kind of the premise of it.
the title of the book came from.
Yes.
Oh, that's amazing. So there's more to this story though of why you wrote this book. You have two children with type 1 diabetes.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
So
That
tell me how that came about, and how did you find out, for one, and what were the emotions involved?
yes. So well, my youngest was the first to be diagnosed, and he was in first grade. And somehow I knew about high thirst being a sign of diabetes. And so he wasn't feeling very well. He was thin. He was just kind of sickly. And so we ended up taking him into the doctor with no really signs or symptoms. You don't have a fever. There really isn't anything that they can diagnose. But there is a simple urine test that basically they call it, if you spill sugar, then you're a type 1. So we immediately left the office and went to the hospital. And it was devastating. It didn't understand anything about it. We didn't know how to count carbs. We had to immediately start injecting him with needles. He
Mm.
was scared, we were scared. And but we journeyed together. But one of the things that I think as a parent is creating that space to not always have to have all the answers, but
Mhm.
to use your curiosity. And so I tried really hard not to shield him from my panic and terror and emotions, but at the same time, wanted to model that it's okay to be upset. And in one of those conversations, he said, "Well, when am I going to die?" And I
Oh,
said, "Well, what do you mean when you're going to die?" And he goes, "Well, there's die and diabetes. So I'm going to die."
it's interesting kids' brain on how they conceptualize that and put that
Right.
together. Yeah.
But had I not been curious and created the space for that difficult conversation, I don't think I would have never keyed on that. And here he would have moved forward thinking I could die any minute. And
Mhm.
what I was able today is to do is say it is a chronic disease and it is very serious, but we're going to partner and work really hard to make sure that you're healthy, and we're going to communicate, and we're going to be on the same team, and we're going to figure this out. And almost a year later, 5 days shy of the first anniversary of my youngest son's diagnosis, um, about actually about 10 days before that, we installed a pump, so which goes onto his body, and it delivers insulin at microscopic levels that when you're young, it's really nice because it can tune into what your body needs. So
Can
we
help
went to
regulate.
a pump class, a pump start class, they call it. I brought the siblings and my mother and a babysitter because I needed everybody to understand what the signs of high or low blood sugars were, because it can get really dangerous really fast.
Absolutely. Mhm.
And about so we started the pump, and then about 5 days before, my middle son comes home and says, "I think I have diabetes." And
Oh,
I said, being the good mother that the parents that we are, right? And he's a middle child, of course, seeking attention. We immediately took his blood sugar. With you just prick the
mhm.
fingertip, and he was 444. Which,
Hi.
if you know anything about diabetes, we want to be somebody that isn't a diabetic usually runs somewhere between 80 and 140,
Yeah.
and he was over 400. So,
Wow.
again, being the good mom and being in complete denial, sent him to school the next day, called the doctor and said, "Hey, just give me a call back. I think we might maybe some prednisone or something." You're just making any kind of excuse.
Right.
And by that afternoon, we were in the hospital with our second diagnosis of type 1.
Yeah.
So that time, instead of being scared, I was just really angry.
Yes.
So I went from being scared to knowing exactly what to do and feeling very confident in this older diabetic who was in 5th grade.
Mhm, mhm,
Yep,
mhm.
yep,
Yeah. So
and
let's talk
type
about this for a second. Let's talk about this for a second because this
okay.
is important. Because normally, in a perfect world, quotation marks, we would have the oldest be diagnosed first because usually the onset is around 7, 8. But you can not show signs and symptoms up until a certain point when it activates, right? And of course, like you have that fear going into the first one. And fear, an initial reaction of grief is going to be whatever. It's going to be one of four things. You're either going to fight it, you're going to run from it, you're going to do nothing, freeze, or you're going to try and manipulate the situation in whatever way, shape, or form that looks like. So, for the first reaction, the initial reaction, your body's just going to do whatever.
Yep,
And then you have to rein yourself in, feel the emotion. And I'm sure there was a lot of thoughts going in your mind from the doctor's office to the hospital where you had to get the injections in your first son of, oh my gosh, oh my gosh, oh my gosh, what is this? Like, how
yes,
do and I love how you just came in with a love and support. And that is the correct answer. In any type of grief situation, it's you don't have to have the answers. You don't have to make up the answers. You don't have to logic through anything. You just regulate your system and then you regulate their system with love and support of we don't know the answers, but we're going to figure this out together. And awesome. Now, second reaction. I mean, this happened, relatively short time frame. And it's two big traumas. Any type of change is a trauma. Any type of grief is a trauma.
Mm-hmm.
When you're hit with a second one, it's like the initial reaction is to fight it. It's what the heck? Why? Why is it no? And then you go into denial, which is
Yes.
actually a defense mechanism.
Yes, absolutely what I did. Just like, there's no way. There's
Yeah,
no way inside of 1 year
correct.
that there's 2. There's no way. Like,
Right. And
no,
with no family history.
with no family history.
Yeah, and no family history. So you have this thought of there's no way, and that's actually a normal thought. And a lot of the times we attach shame and guilt to that thought of I'm a terrible mother. Oh my gosh, why did I
Mm,
to school the next day, and why did I not believe him, and why did I think that he was a middle child seeking attention, like he really needed help, blah 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 blah. And we go down this rabbit hole, but that's because we like to abuse ourselves
yeah.
in the way.
And I'm kind of making fun of myself. Like, I don't beat myself up. I just think it's kind of funny that, because I think you can take a step back and go, "Oh, that's what you were doing right there. You were trying to control it. You were trying to avoid it,
Mhm.
and you just kind of watch that behavior. And when you have the capacity to go back and reflect on that and show yourself kindness, and I think for me, I make fun of myself, not to disparage myself, but just to go, yeah, that's kind of interesting that that's what I did. But yeah, I think it's interesting how you're describing those stages. That's so helpful.
Yeah, and there's different stages of grief. They say that there's 7, and I honestly feel like there's way more. It's multifaceted, multi-layered, like and the trajectory is not like an upwards trajectory. It is back and forth, up and down, like inside out, and sometimes you're just like, "I can't deal with this."
Yes.
Yeah, and it's a lot of emotion all at once because there's an unknown part, and one of the biggest fears of humans is the fear of the unknown.
Yes. And everybody grieves differently. So I have a third son. I have a son that's older than the other 2 sons. So he was like walking around like he had a target on his back, right? Like, when am I going to get diabetes?
Right.
And we were like, we kept testing him to make sure, so that poor kid had enough pokes in his fingertips. And then even my husband's response the first time around versus mine. And then the second time around, he was just very angry. I was angry. He was even more angry. And just, so you're kind of, you're managing all these. And then Harrison, like, well, welcome to my youngest son was, welcome to the club, and Michael's like, well, okay, here, so now all of a sudden the older brother's asking the younger brother for advice, which
Yeah.
is kind of topsy-turvy. So
Yep.
it was just this potpourri of emotions and grief and styles. It was just
Chaos.
interesting. So how do you bring them all together, and how do you have these conversations that are difficult,
Mm,
but that are authentic?
right. And that's what led you to writing this book.
Yeah,
Is
that difficult. I mean, I think people that have experienced that kind, I like how you're calling it trauma. It's almost anticipatory grief too, as a parent. Like, my child's lost all the opportunities. Like, I'm like, well, he can't become an airline pilot because he has
yeah.
diabetes. And my husband's like, well, did he want to become an airline pilot? I'm like, no, I don't think so. But still, right? He can't be over the road trucker either, because you can't have to, and we're laughing like, okay, like all these different anticipatory problems that you start to back into. But
Mhm.
honestly, I think it was COVID too. I think I called it my COVID passion project, because what happened is people weren't able to talk.
Yeah.
People were dying in the hospital from COVID by themselves,
Mhm.
or they couldn't go to church. They couldn't come into a living room and support one another. Like, that family unit was broken apart.
Yeah,
And
our dreams. Mhm.
I thought, you know what? I'm a first time author. I know it's a good story. I've had people tell me it's a good story when I talked about it verbally. But I think my wanting to help people pushed me through my own barriers and self-thought to, I don't know if this is going to be good enough.
Ooh, let's talk about that. Okay,
Mhm.
so that is also a part of grief. Okay. So with that thought of it's not going to be good enough, or Like, what was holding you back? What do you think was the one driver of that thought?
Um, that is a good question. The barriers I put out in front of me are, what if it's not any good? What if it doesn't? What if people don't like it? Right? It's kind of like an ugly baby, right? You put that out there and go, ta-da! So it was really, I own it, right? So if it goes out there and it's not received well, boy, there's no place to hide because it says Sherrie Barch on there and here,
Mhm.
and it's a very intimate story that I've had since I was a child. So there was a lot of like, this is my being, and I'm just going to go, boom, here you go, everybody.
Yep. And that is to keep you safe. Those barriers are to keep you safe and secure in your own little world. And there's the fear of rejection and abandonment. That is wholly tied to the um the fear of the unknown.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
And so you have this personal story. And it's like, well, what if it's not good enough? But what have you found since you've put it out?
It's just been the most rewarding experience besides being a mom and a wife and having a family that I love. It has been one of the most rewarding experiences of my life because it's helping people.
Yeah.
People are, I think I've got almost 70 reviews on Amazon right now. People are leaving me voicemails, they're calling me, they're saying I hadn't thought about it this way. It's just making a difference. And my husband, I dedicated the book to my husband because he finally said, Sherrie, if you could just help one person, isn't it worth it? That's
Mhm.
all you're trying to do. And it's helped so many more people. And I've had social workers use it. I've had hospice organizations put it into their libraries because it is kind of at that adolescent,
Mhm.
early adult and adult level that sometimes the resources aren't as populated.
They're
um,
not. They're not.
it's honestly, I'm 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 proud of her that in 2020 she decided with COVID to go ahead and release it and just go for it. That's the biggest lesson I've learned is go for it.
Yeah. So if someone was writing a book right now, and I have actually a lot of listeners that are trying to tell their stories, how do they get started on something like that?
Well, what I did is I hired a book coach, and the book coach said, "Yeah, no, I'm not. I don't do children's books, and this isn't something I want to do." But I had another idea in mind for a book because I have some businesses that I do, and so and in the book I talk about it. It's an early career book, kind of a fable, again, storytelling. But when COVID hit, I circled back around with her and talked a little bit more about my why, and we did a blueprint, and then from there I hired an illustrator that was a senior in college. I hired an editor. It was an all girl team
Mhm.
and a marketer, and you can move through anything. It's how important is it to you? And my why came up above all those barriers, and all of a sudden they just popped into place. It's an audible because Broadway was closed. There were amazing actresses out there looking for work. So I have a voiceover that is Ashley in the story, that she reads the whole story of Heaven's Bell amazingly.
Mhm.
So it was meant to be. So all I would say is identify your barriers and then identify solutions. Come on,
Mm.
get it, get it moving. People
Yes.
are waiting to hear your story. They're waiting to hear from you. We need to hear from you,
We need to hear from you. Yes, because there's no other person that is uniquely you.
right?
And that's what makes your story different, right? There's a lot of books out there. There's a lot of stories out there, and we'll sit here and we'll lie to ourselves and say, well, I mean, it's not going to be good enough, or this is too similar to someone else's story, or blah, blah, blah. But the thing that makes you uniquely you, it comes out in that, and people connect to that.
Yes. That authenticity. And
Mm.
authenticity doesn't mean that you're not, you know, the best, or I mean, one of the things in the book that I do is because there are two 11-year-olds, there's awkwardness. You don't know
Mhm.
the right thing to say when somebody dies. You don't know. Sometimes you don't even say anything at all, but you still show up. You don't avoid that grief, whether it's happening to you or you're seeing it on TV with all the tragedies that we're seeing. I think it's okay to be authentically you. And if your writing is an extension of that, even better.
Yes, yes. So you bring up a really good point. So I have one rule about grief. Don't expect or premeditate what the other person needs,
Oh, I like that.
because it's called funeral speak. And it's like, "I'm so sorry for your loss," and, "Oh, and, my turtle died last week, and so it."
Yeah, let me relate.
Yeah, let me relate. It comes from a beautiful place. Perfect intentions, like, you want to help soothe and support, but you're expecting and you're assuming what they need to hear instead of just asking, "What
I
can I do for you? How can I support you? I'm here. If you want me to just sit here in silence with you and share space, I will do that until you're ready. And when you're willing and you're ready to reach out, I'm here. I'm
Yes,
supportive." And that's what you did to your sons, and I love it that you just came with love, lead with support, and come from a humble place instead of trying to be this awkward, like, relatable. You can share your story after you validate them and after you share your space if they're willing to hear it, but sometimes people just are so shut off in that moment, which leads me to my next question of how did you find resilience going through this as a family with the dynamic shifts and everything that's going on, and you're balancing 3 boys that are different?
yes, yes. And I was working full time, and my husband. It was. I think what I had to learn, especially after my middle son was diagnosed, pretty quickly, is vulnerability, asking
Mhm,
for help, not trying to be strong. However, so when people would say to me, "Oh my God, I don't know how you're doing it, and you're so strong, and you're so," and it actually stressed me out more because I'm not strong, and I don't want to tell them, "No, I'm not strong," because they think I'm strong. But my brother came up with a wonderful word, and he said, "You know what? I think the word that best describes you right now is relentless." You're
mm,
relentless in your love for your family. You're relentless in making sure that they have advocates all around them until they can be their own best advocate. And you are 100% in. And I loved that word. So that word helped me move forward. And I would use it a lot. Let's be relentless here. I'm being relentless. I'm your partner. So
mm,
when my son went into high school, he still had his pump on from his second grade, first transition between first and second grade. And he said, "Mom," and there's a lot of things that happen with diabetes that it's hard to control. It's 24/7. And
mhm,
sometimes it can just get exhausting. And I could tell um, he knew that the pump was the best way to continue his health. But I knew that socially, it was something that he didn't want to have a cord dangling from him and this medical device stuck into his body.
mhm,
And so, again, making space and having this conversation, we decided that we would try it for 6 months, and and the goal would be not to have him go back on that pump, and that we are going to do this together. And he hasn't been on the pump since. And his A1Cs, for those of you that know anything about type 1 or diabetes, have always been in range and very, very good.
mm.
So we did it.
Wow! Yay! Oh, that's so wonderful to hear. For the listeners, that don't know, my brother also has type 1 diabetes, and there has been some seriously scary moments with that where we don't know if he's gonna be able to pull through. He's had several hospitalizations. When he was younger, he did not take care of his body. Um, He was one of the popular party kids, sorry.
Mhm. Well,
But
we know the carbs of a beer. I
yeah, yeah, and that those are things that, you really have to watch out for, and in those moments that you felt like you had that initial, like, breath in, "I don't know what's going to happen," what got you through those times?
Knowledge. For me, it's knowledge. It's having backup plans. It's being prepared. So, like for example, when they turned 16, and whenever they were to get into the car, I said there always has to be sugar in the car because most of the time where you get into trouble with diabetes isn't it's not enough sugar because your pancreas can't regulate your blood sugar. So it's really important that in order for them to be safe drivers, that if they feel that they're going low or they're low but they're needing to get to work, that they've got sugar. And so I said, if I go to your car and I sit in the driver's seat and there's no sugar within reach, I'm going to ground the car. Not going
Mhm,
to ground you. If you can get a ride with a friend or you can figure it out, but I'm going to ground the car. So I
mhm,
think my coping mechanism was creating safe habits and lifestyles that are going to allow them to live a long, healthy life that they take accountability for and they're their own best advocates. And
mhm.
so when I could lean into that, then we've never been hospitalized. Now I say it, I have to knock on wood here, but
Yeah.
um, they've always done a great job, and it has never been about yelling or crying or drama. It's just it is what it is. We all have things that we have to manage. So how can we do that as a team, but not overfunction either?
Mm,
This is your body, this is your life, and I'm here for you, but I'm gonna get in line behind you.
right. Oh, I love that. Okay, so was there any let's talk about medical trauma for a second and the grief that comes with that. Was there any time that you had dealt with, medical professionals that had said things that were, like I know that for my brother, for example, they were like at that time, they're like, he's not gonna live past 40." Right, and so they put that idea into our family's head of,
Yeah.
"Oh, we only get 40 years." Oh my gosh.
Yes, yes. Oh, I have such a horrible story. So when my youngest was diagnosed, we were in the hospital, and this woman comes walking through the door, and she goes, "Well, welcome to hell." And I went, and she said, "I'm a nutritionalist, and I'm here to let you know right now that he will never be invited to any overnights. He can never go out in the neighborhood by himself because he could pass out in some bushes along the way and die. You'll have to homeschool him because most schools don't have nurses and they don't know what they're doing anyways."
Oh my
It
gosh.
was just like bam, bam, bam. And I'm like, who are you? Why is this happening? And I had enough wits about myself to kind of put all that energy back on her and say, something's not right.
Mm.
And my husband just turned around and said, I have to go. So he avoiding, right? So he leaves the room.
Yep.
And then I sit there and just kind of look at her and think, this can't be right. This can't be right. Well, it ended up, she was a nutritionalist from the cardiac floor. They were running low on nutritionists because there must have been more people needing her services. And she had a daughter who was type 1.
Mm.
So she had a horrific experience with managing this and was basically trying to help me by
Yeah.
telling me all of her experiences. So
A projection is what it's called.
yes, exactly. So
Yeah.
I ended up getting my feet underneath me and then actually going to the floor nurse and saying she needs to be removed from this floor. She's compromised
Yeah.
in what I know she's trying to help and she cannot do this. And then I need somebody that can come in and talk me off the ledge that I'm currently on because I'm
Yep.
freaked out right now.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, because it's like doomsday.
Yeah. And then
Yeah.
when my second son was diagnosed, I had a hospitalist come in. Now remember, my younger son had just been put on the pump. We take my middle son into the hospital. My mother, who's a nurse, but not a type 1 educated nurse, is at my home. she's calling me because the pump is alarming and she doesn't know what to do with the pump. And
Right.
that's a first grader. So I'm trying to talk to my mom about the pump. My husband is on the highway on the way home,
Mhm.
and the hospitalist walks in and goes, and do I hang up on an alarming pump, or do I talk to the hospitalist about my son that's in the bed in front of me?
Wow.
And so I just, as a mom, right? I just say, hang on a second. I said, let me ask you a question. What would you do if you were me? I have a diabetic that just had a pump start within the last 10 days, and my mother-in-law is there because my husband's on the road and the pump is alarming. So do I hang up on her and talk to you, or do I finish this call and you come back?
I love that.
So he ended up coming back. And then that night, another mother and her son came in, and they were Hispanic, and there was a language barrier, but the hospitalist spoke the language. And so he came over to me and said, can you help her? I'll interpret, but you have two, and this is her first. Can you tell her? So we ended up forming this little bond because I was authentic in my communication and just kind of put it out there. Like, this is what's happening in my life right now.
Yeah.
What should we do? So that was it was amazing. So both were turned around into positives, but it really took, I think, as a mom and as somebody that's trying to be, make the best decisions
Mhm.
to kind of lead that.
So let me break this down for the listeners of what's happening in your body. So you have an initial reaction, the initial shock, and your brain is saying something's not right. So it actually registers as danger. So if you felt it in your stomach, in the pit of your stomach, that's life-threatening, which you are in a life-threatening situation. If you felt it in your chest, if it's tingly, if it's pressure, that's anxiety. If it's hollow, that's depression. But since it's a shocking thing that happens to you, your sympathetic nervous system is automatically engaged. So you have to do something. And so, of course, your husband's like, bye, right? Because fight, flight, freeze, fawn. That's the initial response. And there's no guilt and shame in that. And then you have you had said that you had activated, and then you're like reining it in, reining it in, reining it in, which is very difficult to do because what's happening is your limbic system, your survival system is activated, and your prefrontal cortex, the one that is responsible for the logical decisions, is offline. So what you had to do is calm yourself down for a minute, orient yourself to safety, and then you were able to devise a plan. And I love that you just put it in their court of like, what would you like me to do?
That's right.
Right?
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep.
And that helps gain
Yeah.
some control back and some safety within the situation, which oftentimes, especially as parents, we feel so out of control. We want to put our kids in bubbles. Like we want to saran wrap them forever.
Oh,
And
absolutely.
yeah, and it's hard when you feel like you can't protect them.
It's so true. So true. And you can't. All you can do is prepare and provide the best resources and education and transfer of knowledge that you can, but you can't be there with them all the time. The analogy that I follow a woman that actually has three type 1 diabetics, children with diabetes, and she talks about it being a sailboat, and that you're at the harbor and you can pack the sailboat with everything they need, and they can be out there, and some days the sun's shining and it's beautiful, but then there's other days when it's really traumatic and there's a lot of waves, and but there's nothing you can do because you're not in the sailboat with them. Diabetes is a very personal chronic disease.
So your boys are now adults.
Yes.
So
20 and 23.
yeah. So how do you trust that they will be safe?
Because they care about themselves. They know that the youngest one is a personal trainer. The middle one, he went to school, and we interviewed. He went to the disability center just to make sure that he was registered, and they ended up hiring him because
Wow.
he was so articulate on, this is what I need, this is what we're doing. So he came back and actually worked with the disability center throughout his college career, helping people. And I think they're just they got it. They they do a better job at managing their diabetes than me, their father, anyone else. They know their bodies, they pay attention, and, yeah. Sometimes if you wanna live a long, healthy life, have a chronic disease because you don't take anything for granted.
Correct. Yeah. And I love that you said the word prepare instead of protect. And
Mhm.
a lot of us want to protect instead of prepare. But you prepared them for this, and that is your role as a parent because when they turn 18, you switch from a nurturer to a supporter.
Yes.
And a lot of us don't know how to do that because it's hard because we want our babies to be babies all the time, right?
Right, right,
You have a third, that you also have to include in all this. So
right.
how did how did you integrate all of them?
Um, well, and actually my oldest became a personal trainer as well. And that's what I think got my youngest interested. So very healthy, always make good choices. And we're all in it together. We're counting carbs, we're making healthy lifestyle decisions. And we kept getting him tested to make sure that he knew he was going to be okay.
Mhm,
And if not, we knew exactly what to do if he was diagnosed. But I think there's a different level of intimacy
mhm,
when, as a family unit, you've got to you've got to care for one another in a way that maybe typical families don't have to. You
mhm,
know, so you know, I can't drive my car because I don't have sugar, or I left my insulin pen in the movie theater, we have to go back.
mhm, mhm,
And it's having the patience to know that, every single day, every single time I have a latte, I have to inject, and now we've got movie theater popcorn and candy. And, sometimes we are going to forget the insulin pen. And you know what? Okay, let's go get it. And so it's just having that community as a family. Plus, it's funny, they took a class in high school where they said, "How many? Raise your hand if you have family meals together once a week, twice a week, 3 times a week." Well, when you're diabetic, right? Like, we're counting carbs. We're always having dinners together because we had to count their carbs when they were little. So,
yeah.
there's a side benefit to the disease, right? So I always try to find things to be thankful for. It's shifting the mindset of, instead of being angry about diabetes, being grateful for insulin. And so it really is about just that shift. And if you can shift, then your kids won't have to maybe shift because they're already going to be there.
Let's talk about mindset. Mindset is huge through this because your reaction is going to prepare your kids' is a reaction. So they're going to react in the same way that you do. So if you freak out, they freak out,
Yes.
right? And if your mindset says, okay, for grief in general, I say for people, there's not one person that's going to spend every single moment of your life with you, which means that we only have these people in our lives that come and go only for a specific amount of time. So if you look at it as I have them for this much time, and this is the time that I'm going to cherish and I'm going to be present and in the moment for, and whatever this looks like, however time that I have with them, it's a blessing
Yes.
instead of how much time do I have left?
Yes.
When am I going to lose them? When
That
are
anticipatory grief.
Yes, it's preparatory grief and it's anxiety, it's fear, and that comes from the spirit of fear instead of a spirit of love of I'm going to connect, I'm going to because if you're coming from a spirit of fear, your brain already disconnected because you're in survival mode. So you're not actually connecting fully to them.
Wow. Right. Right.
Mhm.
Wow.
And it's little word changes. It's little word changes of I get to experience this or I have to deal with diabetes. I love how you said like instead of like I hate the diabetes, like I'm really, really, really grateful for the insulin. Yeah.
And the medical devices and the technology, it's just I it's gonna be okay.
Yeah. What is one thing that you really wanted when going through this process, or one thing that you felt like, man, if I could have just had this, it would have made my life easier? And I know that's coming from a place of lack, but you know what I mean.
Mhm. I think for me, the immediate introduction into this new place
Mhm.
that happens in a second. It happens in 30 seconds. All of a sudden, you've moved from your old life to your new life, period.
Yeah.
And I think having a better acclimation to it, not having welcome to hell. I
Mm.
looked up type 1 diabetes on the internet right when it happened, and they said it was called dead in bed syndrome, where parents were finding their children dead because their blood sugars went so low because they gave them too much insulin. I shut it down and never looked again. It would have been wonderful to have that diagnosis, but then instantly have, okay, let's talk about what that means. Because it
Mhm.
is traumatic.
Mhm.
And I found it, and JDRF was an amazing resource, and they're just a wonderful organization. But I think that's what I would have liked, is just somebody helping me understand that there's resources and that we have the tools and technology to create healthy outcomes.
Now let's talk about resources, because I honestly feel like the Ring to Remember is amazing resource, because it's a journal, and it asks you. We were going through, before we hit record, we were going through some of the questions, and I think that they're absolutely profound questions that we don't necessarily ask. We don't really think to ask.
Yes.
So
And
tell me a little bit more about that journal that goes with Heaven's Bell, the book.
okay, well, what happened is when people read the book, when they were done and they would give me feedback, it wasn't about the book. It was what the story did to them.
Mhm.
So at the end, they said, I feel joy. I'm remembering things. I can't, I've moved in my mental capacity to think about grief differently. And I'll never forget my dad, when we make meatballs, always talks about my grandpa, because my dad would make meatballs with my grandpa. And or I served in Vietnam, and I think about my comrades or what. And so all of a sudden I'm thinking, people need a place to be able to put these memories down. But I wanted to keep it in the spirit of that adolescent, just kind of not heavy, how are you feeling? How sad are you on a scale of 1 to 10? Like, not that kind of journal. And so, I'll read one example, and I don't know, I mean, it has the prompts and then a place here where if you're not a writer, but maybe you're a drawer, you've got mementos that you wanna put in here, there's a space to doodle, draw, tape, glue, write, express feelings, and share memories in your own way. But,
Mhm.
for example, one of the prompts is, what is the first thing you're going to say to your loved one when you see them in heaven?
Mhm.
And then what do you think they will say to you?
Mhm.
So it's just creative, just and you can open the journal up to any page. There's no page numbers, there's no order. It's just a place for you to be safe and have some space and reflect. And I think the journal, depending on your personality, could be yours only, or it could be a family journal where everybody puts in memories. Because I think the vantage points, we could have the same experience, but see that Christmas or see that birthday party from different angles and different vantage points that might even create more richness as you remember your loved one.
I love the idea of a that gave me chills, by the way. Oh my goodness. I love the idea of those prompting questions, because you're not only activating your logical side, but you also have the bilateral movement of writing, which is nonverbal. It's not words, even though we have to compute it into words. It's actually not words. We're not actually speaking the words. We're writing it, which is a very physical thing. And now you're creating something which you are using your prefrontal cortex, you're using your creative mind, you're using all sorts of part of your brain, which is why art is so expressive, right? Because sometimes we can't find the words to know how we feel or articulate. And oftentimes you'll find this in people who have neglect in their past or abuse in their past. We don't process things well. We don't process food well. We have digestive issues. We have all kinds of things. So if you have those symptoms, you really just can't process, period. And that includes emotions, that includes words, that includes finding. So part of what I do is I find the words and I find the correct words. And sometimes you have to almost backdoor it in order to find the way that you feel, to articulate the way that you feel, in order to express it in the way that is going to be effective for whatever the situation is. Because a lot of the times we don't express things well. Like your husband, you had said that you were angry, but he was angrier. Actually, so a lot of the times with males, grief is expressed in anger.
Right.
So they're actually grieving. They're not actually mad.
Angry.
Angry.
Yeah, and they're able to express it in a way that maybe, I love what you just said about, I just had this huge aha moment. Speaking of finding words, you said backdoor it.
Yeah.
That's what the story of Heaven's Bell is. It's a backdoor way to talk about a topic that everybody avoids because it is labeled as highly conflictual. So it's not trickery. And I didn't, but when you said that, I'm like, that's it.
Yeah.
Read this story. It's fiction. And I guarantee you, when you're done reading the story, you will be in a place that's different than where you were when you started, that may help you have a conversation about a really difficult subject. That's it.
I love how you said like highly conflictual. And that's why we avoid it. We don't like conflict.
Right.
Because we don't want to lose more. Because we go into it with a mindset of I'm going to lose something, or I'm going to start something that's going to take something away. And that is the connection that we're so desperately needing because we lost whatever it is we lost, or gained an experience, is what I like to say.
Right. Right.
Yeah.
And that is it. I think these two together will help you gain access to even more love than you're experiencing right now, and more memories that will bring you joy, and be present instead of, like you said, a place from fear.
Mm-hmm. I love it. Okay, so where can they find Heaven's Bell and A Ring to Remember?
So Amazon has it. That's the easiest place. Just type in Heaven's Bell and you'll see both. It's a 2-book set. But also, if you want to go to www.heavensbell.com, there's more about me and some feedback from readers, and some other thoughts that I have around this incredible journey.
As a therapist, I highly recommend people to get this book now. And honestly, so this book is also in all kinds of places. That we're putting it in places that normally, I mean, you can't find resources for kids like this. Like, you cannot. And to where it connects to an adult, because a lot of the times we're stuck in our own trauma, which is why we're stuck in childhood anyway, which is why sometimes we act in the age that the trauma has happened. So if you act like a 3-year-old and a 16-year-old, that's why. And that's why we connect to it so well, because there is a part of us that can connect on that type of level. And I love the fact that this is a conversation starter and that it can really help families heal. And I love the way that you said before we hit record, it's like you put this and this on top of a casserole and give it to
Yes.
because
Yes. That's my mental image is you take this and you put it on top of a casserole and you drop it off and you say, let me tell you a little bit about this story. I think you're going to love it. And it continues the healing along with the grieving process for the family versus, I mean, and not that flowers and fruit kebabs are good too, but I just feel like it's more helpful. At least that's the feedback that I've gotten from readers, is it gave me the courage to go into a house that I probably would have just sent a card because I was excited to tell them about your story.
I was excited about a story that you told me about a veteran in Vietnam. A lot of us know that Vietnam veterans do not talk about what happened because it was so brutal and it was so unbelievably out of the norm. And he had not thought about his comrades at all since he had left. And this allowed him to open up, and it gave him permission to start thinking about it and to start grieving years later. And so it's never too late to start grieving. And the biggest way that I can explain it is that when you grieve, rip it off like a Band-Aid. Don't do it slowly, because your emotions have to go somewhere. They're energy. And if you allow it to just flow through you and just say, this hurts, this sucks, I'm going to feel this. It's going to be a lot of pain all at once. However, when it flows through you, it's done. There's peace. And there's peace faster, instead of, oh, let's rip open a little bit and then close it and then rip open a little bit more. And what that does to you, it actually causes more damage when you do it that way. So the best way to grieve as humans is to just feel the emotion and create safety around that emotion, and figure out a way for the energy to flow through you, whether it be, usually it's through physical means. So working out, stretching, going for walks, communicating with someone, being in the presence of someone. There's that physical connection, which I love when you said, like, during COVID, we couldn't connect.
No.
So a lot of the times what we're finding now is that people are having a hard time connecting.
Yes.
So it's a nice little thing to bring us together to learn how to reconnect and have these difficult conversations. And whereas conversation is difficult anyway.
Yes. Yes. And there have been families that have said they've read it, they've passed the book around in a long car ride, coming, going across country, or they were anticipating, they knew somebody that they loved was going to die, so they had the children read it, and kind of in preparation. So it's just yes, anything we can do. I'm still stuck on back door. I love that. I think that's just a great way to describe a safe place to just start exploring that grief. And sometimes they're just not that kind of openness that's available to somebody that may need it.
Yeah, it's another way. It's just another
way.
more than one way.
Yes.
Just another way.
Yes.
Sherrie, thank you so much for being
Thank
on the
you,
podcast.
Haley.
I really
You're
appreciate
just amazing. I just love listening to your podcast. You're so smart, and you communicate in a way, at least for, I'm not a trained grief therapist or therapist anyway, but it's so helpful the way you explain things, and it's helped me tremendously. So thank you.
Yeah. If there was one thing that you can say to our listeners, what would it be?
Follow your why and go for it. If you have something to say it. It's worth it.
Thank you so much.